In this video, I'm going to talk about how to handle and store plasterboard sheets. Obviously this is very important, otherwise your plasterboard can end up looking like this. You always want to store your plasterboard on some level bearers. So we want to try and keep our plasterboard as flat as possible. So what we'd do is we'd find a nice flat floor, we'd put some bearers down underneath. They're normally slats of timber, like some 2x1 or something like that. I always like to put a few bearers down under my plasterboard to spread the weight. So you would take your flat floor, you would lay your battens across. The more battens, the less likely the plasterboard is to bend, and then I would stack all the other plasterboards on top. That's the method I would use if the plasterboard is staying on the ground for a long period of time. If I was doing a construction project and the plasterboard was going to remain stacked for maybe a couple of days or maybe a week, sometimes it's easier to save space on the building site to actually stack your plasterboards up against the wall. Now that's not recommended if they're going to be stored there for a long time, but if you're storing them there for a couple of days, possibly up to a week, they should be fine lent up against the wall. Really, the textbook way to store them is to put battens out on the floor and stack them flat. Plasterboard sheets come in lots of varying sizes. The thicknesses are fairly standard across the board. There's only 3 types of plasterboard thickness, which makes it a lot easier for you. There's 9.5mm thick, which is quite thin, which I only ever use for overboarding existing ceilings, where I don't want to add too much weight. There's 12.5mm, which is the most common plasterboard, and I tend to use that for everything. On new ceilings, new walls, I use 12.5mm plasterboard. You can also get fire plasterboard in 12.5mm, sound plasterboard and acoustic plasterboard. And the other type of plasterboard that exists, it's less common over in the UK, is 15mm thick plasterboard, which I think is a bit too cumbersome, and I've never used it once in my 10 years of building. So they're different thicknesses of plasterboard. You can also get different sizes.